looking at the adaptations of the leaf for the process of photosynthesis. So yesterday we finished the structures. We spoke about all of the tissues found within the leaf that allows for the leaf to function to bring about photosynthesis, which produces food, which supplies the plant with sufficient glucose for growth, and all of the life processes that plants go through. So today this is basically going to speak about all of the components that we already know. It's just going to reinforce the structure of the leaf and how it's adapted for photosynthesis. So it's really a kind of a recap lesson anyway. Okay, so firstly, what does the leaf need to be adapted for? It needs to be adapted for trapping light for photosynthesis. That's the main thing. So leaves are exposed nice and high on the branches in order to get maximum light exposure. It also needs to allow for gas exchange to take place, so carbon dioxide moving into the leaf, oxygen moving out, or if it's going through cellular respiration. Remember, plants do both processes. They do photosynthesis and they do cellular respiration, so they use carbon dioxide to produce oxygen, but then they also use that oxygen to break down glucose to give them energy, and that does produce carbon dioxide, so they do both processes. Then we also have to be adapted to reduce water loss. Water is a fundamental requirement for photosynthesis, and so reducing water loss is essential. Okay, so how is it adapted? Light, energy, water, and carbon dioxide is absorbed to manufacture food, glucose, and oxygen is released. The adaptations of the leaf for photosynthesis are listed below. So let's talk about how they are listed, or where they, oh, there's our little leaf just doing a little dance. That's cute. Okay, so just be reminded quickly of the structure of the leaf. We obviously have the cuticle, we have those layers underneath, we've got the palisade mesophyll. Sorry, let's go first. Cuticle, then we have the epidermal layer, upper epidermis, palisade mesophyll, spongy mesophyll, lower epidermis with guard cells and cuticle, and then we have a vein found inside of the leaf. So that's just basic structure again. So here is how is it adapted? Firstly, the width of the leaf. Okay, so structure in terms of width, it's nice and wide, it kind of branches out to give you maximum exposure to light. That gives you a greater surface area, that light can actually hit that leaf and then can be trapped. It is quite thin. So a leaf is not very thick like we see, the stem of a plant or the trunk of a plant, etc. So it's quite thin, and that allows for easy movement of gases from the lower epidermis through to the upper epidermis. Remember, you want the gases, carbon dioxide, that is required to be able to pass through up to this top layer. So firstly, it's nice and wide. Secondly, it is quite thin. Is anybody writing? You guys are writing? Okay, I'll give you just 2 seconds to write. Do we need music? I don't like when you're waiting. Please hold. Okay, can I move on? Remember guys, you do have these notes, so if you miss anything, you can get them off of the little partial. Okay, so I'm just going to move on. Right, so we are going to be focusing on this top layer. The top layer has got a greater amount of chlorophyll. That top layer, because it has lots and lots of chlorophyll, it traps the most amount of light. So in these palisade mesophyll cells, those palisade mesophyll cells are tightly packed next to each other. We've got light coming through. Remember, your epidermal cells at the top layer are transparent to allow for light to penetrate to this lower level. And then this lower level has got lots and lots of chlorophyll in order to trap all of that. We have this air pocket over here behind the stomata. So those are your guard cells. There is our stoma, single stoma, many stomata. So that's a stoma. Behind that, we kind of have this gas chamber, and that allows for the movement of gases into and out of the leaf quite effectively. Right, so let's talk about the palisade mesophyll. Okay, so once again, the palisade mesophyll, its position is an adaptation because it's nice and high in the leaf. It's exposed to the upper surface. Features, it is box shaped. So that box shape allows it to tightly pack next to each other to give lots and lots of cells all in a row, all exposing to huge amounts of light. Function, obviously, photosynthesis. Okay, we don't need to worry about that. Adaptations for gas exchange. Leaves are designed to allow carbon dioxide to get into the main chlorophyll layer at the top of the leaf. They have small holes called stomata on the undersurface. Each hole is open or closed by 2 guard cells, and the guard cells will regulate this. All of this, guys, is stuff we've done. You should be confident with everything that I'm saying. Okay? So once again, there's our guard cell. It's just illustrating this. There's our guard cell, which will open and close the stoma to prevent too much water loss, but also to allow for gases exchange. There it is again. There's our stomata. This is what we looked at under the microscope on Wednesday. Huh? Wednesday we did that little prep. We looked at the guard cells under the microscope. Okay, these are all adaptations, guys. So here we go, just to remind us. Stomata open and close at different times of the day. So early in the morning, when it's not too hot yet, the stomata will open to allow for gases exchange to take place. As temperature rises throughout the day, the stomata will close to prevent water loss. So part of this gas exchange concept is that we need carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, but we don't want to lose too much water because we also need the water for photosynthesis. And so when there is great temperatures, when things are getting hot, because transpiration will increase in hot environments, the stomata will close. So stomata will open and close at different times. When it is light, the plant needs carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So the stoma are open. At night, during the dark, they will close. It just depends on what is exactly happening. Here you can see they're nice and open. At 12 midday, when it's really hot, it closes a little bit to obviously prevent too much water loss. Okay, really guys, there's nothing, yes?
So like plants in the desert now, will they usually have their stomata closed?
Plants in the desert have other adaptations, because remember they need the gases exchange to take place. So their adaptation is usually a thicker cuticle, so a significantly thicker cuticle. They also have more spongy tissue. You'll notice that they'll have more storage for water in the cells, as opposed to allowing transpiration to take place. So the guard cells are necessary. They will close when it gets extremely hot, open during the early morning and late at night, or just kind of midday-ish, not midday, sorry, what's that time, like just before dusk, okay? Then they will open to allow for gas exchange and will trap light. So what it can do, the chlorophyll can actually trap that light. And remember, it's going through cellular respiration. There's actually something called the compensation point in plants. This is not kind of in the content, but when photosynthesis, in other words, the rate of photosynthesis is equal to the rate of cellular respiration, this is referred to as the compensation point. Because remember, photosynthesis uses, so this is basically just a cycle taking place. Yes? Mm-hmm. So during cellular respiration, we release ATP, obviously, energy, but we also release CO2 and water during cellular respiration. Plants will use CO2 and water to give off oxygen and glucose. Yes? So they can actually, essentially, go through this process. The only thing that's really, really, really fundamental in terms of what plants need is water. Because, so it can supply its own gases. You see that? Mm-hmm. So this, as much as the stomata are necessary, okay, they can go through what they call the compensation point. Does that make sense, everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is the compensation point, when the rate of photosynthesis is equal to cellular respiration, and the plant basically supplies everything it needs except for this concept of water. So as long as it can keep water, so it can close the stomata to keep the water, it can go through this process to sustain itself. It wouldn't be able to then store anything or supply as a producer to any other organisms, but that allows its own metabolic processes to take place. So when cellular respiration can't take place, or when photosynthesis can't take place because of lack of gases, then it'll just go into this kind of compensation point, not produce a lot to store, but essentially produce enough to keep itself okay. Does that make sense? Okay, pretty cool when you think about it like that, which is why this component is really, really the main component that brings about death in plants. Okay, you don't water your plants, they don't. Okay, sweet. So this is just a table to give all of the adaptations. So I'm going to quickly fly through this, everything we have done. So firstly, adaptations for the absorption of light. The leaf is flattened, so we have a flattened lamina to increase surface area for maximum absorption. Transparent cuticle and epidermis to allow light to penetrate through to the chlorophyll-containing cells. Large number of chloroplasts in your palisade mesophyll immediately below the epidermis to enable maximum absorption. Everything, tick, 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 we're happy with. Okay, stuff we've done. Palisade mesophyll cells arranged at right angles to the upper epidermis allow a greater number of cells to make contact with that upper epidermis. So there's lots and lots and lots of cells. Palisade cells are long for deeper penetration to allow for maximum light exposure and rate of photosynthesis. And then the palisade cells are located directly below the epidermis, promoting easy access for light. So that's all of light. Absorption for carbon dioxide. The walls of the mesophyll tissue, so the palisade mesophyll as well as the spongy mesophyll, they aren't thickened with any lignin or suberin. They just have cellulose cell walls, which allows for the movement of gases to take place relatively easily. Okay? So the walls of the mesophyll tissue are thin to allow for easy diffusion of carbon dioxide and water. Large air spaces between the spongy mesophyll, which is why it's called the spongy mesophyll, allowing those gases to move through to get to that palisade layer. Permits rapid diffusion of carbon dioxide into the cells. Right, continuing with adaptations for transport of water and manufactured food. We know that every leaf has got a vein, and that vein has got xylem and phloem. Remember in the vein, if you remember the structure of the leaf, if this is the upper epidermis and this is the lower epidermis, if that vein is situated over here, the top cells, these are going to be carrying, this is going to be xylem. Okay, that's going to be transporting water. This is going to be phloem. The ventral layer of tissues is phloem. The dorsal layer of tissues is xylem. So presence of xylem tissue in the veins ensures that a constant supply of water is available for photosynthesis, as long as there is water in the environment. And that xylem, and we're going to talk about this when we do the root and the stem, that xylem tissue is continuous from the root all the way through the stem to the leaves. So it creates almost, and somebody asked, how do plants get their water being transported? There's something called transpiration pool, okay? So if we have, and this was DR, I think you asked it right at the start, and I said we would talk about it later, but if we have, for example, a tree over here, it has xylem tissue that's running from the roots up the stem to the leaves, okay? So it has xylem, and the more water that is lost, the more the cohesion forces of water molecules. Water molecules have cohesion forces that basically allow them to kind of move up with the next one. Okay, when you take a straw and you put a straw into a glass of whatever, water, do you notice that the water goes straight up the straw? You don't actually have to suck it. Have you ever seen that? No. That's a force where molecules adhere to the surface of the straw and they move up. Okay? And as you create a suction, you create almost like this pressure, it flows up. And as long as there's movement up, the water will be drawn up. Does that make sense? It's called transpiration pool. We'll do it later. And so as we have water, because the xylem is continuous with the roots and the stem to the leaves, there's this suction mechanism that takes place. Remember, xylem is adapted. The cells of xylem, do you all remember the cells of xylem? They have no cross walls. So xylem cells look like that. They have this continuous, and xylem is a dead tissue. Do you remember that? Okay, so xylem is a dead tissue, no cross walls, water flows through it. There's no cellular content. There's no nucleus, there's no cytoplasm. It's a dead cell. It is thickened, and remember it's thickened in those various patterns. So it can be thickened with kind of like this spiral pattern. You'll remember when I did this? Mm-hmm. And it's thickened with lignin. And so that xylem, because it is continuous, xylem is adapted to allow for the movement of water to the leaves. Are we all happy? So quick recap on xylem. Everyone good? Any questions? Fantastic. Okay. We're almost done. That. Let's finish up. Cool. So we've done water. So the presence of phloem tissue, so we've done our xylem. We all happy with xylem? Okay. The presence of phloem tissue in the veins ensures that any products of photosynthesis are transported to other parts. Okay? And that is our adaptation for water and manufactured food. Last adaptation, guys, is gas exchange and adaptation for transpiration. So gas exchange, we know that the stomata are present on the upper and lower surface, more on the lower surface though. Okay? There's a great number of stomata on the lower surface to allow for oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide to exit, or vice versa. Remember, carbon dioxide will enter for photosynthesis, and oxygen will exit during photosynthesis, this kind of concept. Okay? Large spaces between your sponge and mesophyll tissue permits rapid diffusion of gases. Thin cell walls of mesophyll tissue permits easy diffusion of the gases. And then we have a waxy cuticle to prevent excessive water loss. Fewer stomata on the dorsal side that are exposed to direct sunlight. And the stomata have the ability to close to reduce water loss. And that, grade 10, is the internal and the external structure of the leaf, as well as how the leaf is adapted for photosynthesis.